Hello there. Welcome to Issue Space. We are a podcast and community for everyone who's working to save the world. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist, the creator of the space, the curator of these conversations, and we're really just trying to create breathing room for folks who have committed their careers to pursuing positive change to be able to process all the things that come with that. So we're glad that you're here. You can learn more about us and join our community at issuespacemedia.com, and we're happy to have you. This episode of the Issue Space podcast is called Equitable Expectations: How One Impact Pro Defines Her Worth Beyond DEI. And I would like to speak about this title. I know a bit about myself. I know that my titles do the most. I know that there's like 8 colons and semicolons and 20 commas and turns of phrase and alliterations and a metaphor and all that stuff and like an emoji at the end. But I do put a lot of thought into how we're framing the conversation because this is a nuanced space and we're talking about real personal experiences. And I think that the words make a difference. So I want to just very quickly touch on the meaning of equitable expectations in this context, because I think that expectation is a huge spoken and unspoken force when it comes to why we feel and behave the way that we do in this current chapter of inclusivity, of talking about identity and thinking about identity in our work, and social impact. So I am kind of counting this current chapter of this conversation, as many of us do, from 2020 to present. That is not, and 2020, the moment being the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence and growth of Black Lives Matter and the visibility of the Black plight, basically, in the United States, where I live and work, where our guest today lives and works, and the reactions that came from institutions, organizations, public figures from that tension. And that's not to say that every time we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'll probably say DEI throughout this conversation just to have like a quick moniker. But that's not to say that that is the only, that the Black struggle is the only struggle on the basis of identity in this country or in social impact work. That's not to say that that is the only significant moment and movement that have come to the fore in recent years. But I think because this is a conversation series about work, I think for most of us, when work started feeling different about diversity, equity, inclusion, identity, all of that stuff, affinity, I think that is the marker. So that's kind of like, I just wanted to situate us. And when I talk about expectations, I think from that moment, 2 sets of expectations arose. One thing is that this is the first time for many of us in memory in our lifetimes, but certainly in our professional lifetimes, that 2020 moment when you saw institutions kind of say yes to leaning into conversations about race and identity and justice for the first time. It was the first time that we'd seen that yes, that we'd heard that yes, that we saw people put real investment down and say, yes, I'll change my priorities for the year. And yes, I'll change my hiring plan. And yes, I'll create a new team. And yes, I'll put a fund together and I'll give some grants, And so while I don't know any Black people or people of color who were like, oh, everything's fixed. This is great. There was enough of a response to the calling in that I think many of us expected that our working lives, especially in social impact, when you're talking about vulnerable communities and targeted communities all the time, would be different from that point forward. When people are putting things beyond thoughts and prayers on the table, when they're putting real money and resources behind something, then you kind of do start to shift your expectations around like, oh, okay, this might be a new era. This might be the era where I can speak more of my truth. I can be more honest. I can expect to see different faces and experience different dynamics, So I think we kind of, I'm saying we as a practitioner of color, as you know, I'm Black, first generation Black woman. But I think anybody who may be identified as marginalized, who was used to kind of stuffing their real experience down in their work, kind of was like, okay, let me leave a door open. Something new is going on here. Something feels a little different. But then there was this second set of expectations where sometimes they were explicitly stated and sometimes they were explicitly supported, and other times they were just sort of in the ether. That was kind of like from the institutional side, like, okay, yes, 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 we've made these commitments. We want to do this work. We want to get into this, but you're going to like do most of it, right? You're going to like help us. you're going to shepherd us, right? You're going to like, you're going to shift what you're doing to like help us help you, right? And, you know, with generosity, I can say that's natural if our whole point is that you're not an expert, you haven't done this work before, you know, you don't have the track record, you don't have the representation to lean into a conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, then how could we expect them day one to show up that way? So that's, you know, that's real. But at the same time, I don't know a single professional and social impact, and I would imagine this maps in some way to the broader working world, who didn't have conflicted feelings about that set of expectations, who didn't feel like it's the best of times and the worst of times. Like I have these new opportunities to be myself or to do work in a different way or with different people, but I also have so much pressure, so much added responsibility, not always explicitly spoken or compensated, you know. So it's complicated. So I just wanted to bring you into my little dramatic title of equitable expectations and share where we're going with the conversation. So today's conversation is going to be a one-on-one with a person that I'm a very big fan of, and I'm very humbled and excited that she would be here. We are joined by Jana P. Jana P amplifies change makers, issues, cultural conversations for over 15 years, getting her start on Capitol Hill, supporting elected officials, being a press secretary, and now is the founder and creative director of P Nation, which is a shop that helps creatives and organizations connect authentically and inclusively to different audiences to make change. And I'm going to embarrass her. Jana, so P Nation, I think just had a first birthday, if I'm remembering correctly. And they have just been recognized as one of the top agencies by PR Net for 2024, one of the top 100 agencies, which is not a small feat. And it really speaks to the authenticity and inclusivity mantra, because they're really reaching people and resonating at kind of an outsized scale to how young and fresh they are. So I'm very excited to have Jana. Jana, thank you so much for being here.
Kat, that intro, come on. Do you need me? Thank you for having me, and congrats to you.
Of course. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Jana, I like to give the people a little window into your professional self just for context, but I want to invite you. Is there anything about Jana, the person, you know, maybe your heritage, maybe where you grew up, anything on the personal side that you would be willing to share with us to kind of round out who you are?
Sure. Ooh, where do I start? That was an excellent intro, so thank you for that. On the personal side, I would say, yeah, born and raised in Alabama, two amazing parents. How I was raised definitely shaped like everything for me and makes a ton of sense the work that I do today. We'll get into it more, but you could imagine being Black, being raised in southern rural, though it's pretty city, Huntsville, Alabama. I don't want to start too deep, but girl, it's definitely nuanced. Grateful to have parents that were highly educated, highly successful, but spent a lot of my childhood confused as to why they had to silence themselves when around folks that didn't look like them.
That's powerful. What did you want to be when you were growing up? Did you have a dream job?
Oh, girl. Okay. So I like this question because it made me go to like baby Jana, as I call it. I always wanted to be a pediatrician, mostly because I loved spelling and I could spell pediatrician. Okay.
Stop.
But then the deeper side of me, that's the surface answer, but the deeper answer would be I think I wanted to be a pediatrician because that was one of my first interactions with somebody that didn't look like me, but made me feel respected. So that's deep, but if we go light, it's because I like to spell, girl.
I mean, it's all part of your story. Oh my gosh. I think there's something to that though. Those formative experiences, even what you were saying about observing your parents kind of code switch or shrink
Yeah.
themselves is very, very real. Okay. So as we know, we're having a conversation today about kind of when DEI exploded culturally in recent years, the social impact sector was a part of that. And it put many practitioners like you and me in these like forks in the road professionally. So I've shared a little bit about like fragments of my story with working on kind of identity-based works as a specific focus within social impact, but just to kind of share it again. So when I first got into the working world, I was in the music industry. I started in the early 2010s feeling really called to do something that would be more directly supportive to people. And the things that were triggering me were high profile police killings and civilian killings. I remember Trayvon Martin's murder really, really affecting me and being one of those, like, what am I doing with my life moments in my life. Then eventually I had to figure out, what does it look like to work in a field that helps people? How do I bring my skill set that was about like communications and creating content and cultivating connection with an audience, very like kind of mass communications skills. How do I bring that to that context? And was lucky to find an organization that lived at the intersection of those two things. All of their clients, whether it was a for-profit, nonprofit, a high net worth individual, a media company, whatever it was, a major brand, they all were approaching with the intent to do social good, but they wanted to do it comparably to how, you would seed any other idea in the world. And so for me, it was right place, right time. They were looking for my skill sets. I was looking to make this pivot. In myself, in my mind and my heart, I knew that I was motivated, among other things. I knew I was motivated to try to do some small thing to make life better for Black people. And sometimes I reflect on, you're talking about your family. Sometimes I reflect on just like the seeds that are planted in you almost that you don't really think about. So I haven't shared, but on my dad's side, so my dad is from Ghana, and his grandfather's brother, my great uncle was the second president of Ghana post-revolution, post-liberation from Britain.
Wow.
And which is kind of just like a cool thing. They're on the currency. You see it in museums and stuff. It's very cool. It's very humbling. And that branch of the family is still involved in politics in Ghana today. But I often think about how that's not something that I think about every day. But, I believe in these like ancestral kind of seeds and callings and stuff. And
Absolutely.
I never feel like I can look away from when something doesn't feel right, when it doesn't feel just, when it doesn't feel fair, when it feels like somebody's being cheated or oppressed. It's so distracting to me. I can't move on from it. And so I felt that pull, and I was lucky to find a place where it seemed like I could meld my skill sets with that very deep drive, with my concern about the treatment of people who looked like me, who identified as Black as well. Even though that was within me, that wasn't the first, I didn't come into the field or the organization being like, here's what I'm here to work on. I was there to learn. I was there to build a portfolio slowly. And it was actually an internal experience that kind of opened the door for me working on what we would call diversity, equity, and inclusion. We participated in a staff training, one of these racial justice trainings. This is 2017. And my experience with it was super negative. I felt I was one of 2, maybe 3 Black people in the room, probably one of maybe 5 or 6 people of color at all. And I felt like I had been so excited about this space. I had been so excited about this organization. I felt more belonging and purpose than I ever had. But in that moment, just the way the training was facilitated, all of a sudden I felt othered again. All of a sudden I felt alone. All of a sudden I remembered being 6 years old and being the only one in my class, and it's Martin Luther King Day and they're showing the video and everyone turns and looks at you to see how you're reacting, all of those things. And so the head of people and culture at the time approached me and was like, you seemed really upset. To her credit, white woman, didn't have to notice, didn't have to approach me, nothing like that. Herself didn't have a negative experience. She approached me. She's like, you seemed really upset. Why was that? And as I was telling her how the experience felt for me, she was like, well, what can we do instead? And that led to starting what now we would brand as an equity transformation, but just a commitment to educating and being educated with the organization on how to be more sensitive to different experiences, lived experiences. And then that in turn gave me an opportunity to feel more empowered to bring it into my portfolio work. So actually explicitly with clients and partners talking about, like this is who's most harmed. So this is who we should be focusing our efforts on, or this is who's underserved. There are resources that serve different constituencies who are impacted by this problem, but not Black people or not people of color. So that's where we should focus. And then again, a matter of being where you're supposed to be in the right moment. The culture kind of caught up with that, and we were able to be met not with resistance, but with people being like, oh yes, I want to get this right. So that's what kind of gently pivoted my path. It's not like it was so far away from what I was thinking and feeling, but it also wasn't anything I would have predicted that I would go into working internally at all, but let alone internally on like equity learning experiences for the organization, or having a portfolio and a practice area about racial equity and things like that. So that is kind of how I found DEI weaving its way into my professional life. And I'm curious if you can share when and how did it come to feature in your work and the way you do your work?
Love that. For better or for worse, like you just sharing that story. This is what I love about Black women is the way that we are able to bond through trauma, for better or for worse. Like, of course, I have a similar story of when I was in a position where I felt othered on the job, and then luckily a white woman saw. So definitely can relate to that. I think the difference for me in answering your question is since my first job, I have been in service of amplifying my three core communities: race, gender, sexuality. And whether I knew it at the time or not, like even just hearing you explain, I went back to my very first job at 16, working at Girls Incorporated to help young Black girls that were inner city children just understand math and science, and how much I loved that. And so naturally, when I went off to college, I majored in journalism and wrote for the paper and just loved sharing stories of others. I've hopped around quite a bit, but when I look back, I mean, from working for sports teams, working in the labor movement, working on Capitol Hill, working on some of our largest movements to date, from Women's March to June 2020 to, the Me Too movement, I have always been at it. And so for me, when DEI pops up, it does hit a little differently because, we've been doing this work way before DEI became cool or in. We just now want to recognize it because, unfortunately, certain communities feel like they don't have a choice but to pull people to have a seat at their table.
Are there moments where you felt like contrasting, this is a moment when I felt really empowered to do what I do, to put marginalized people first, versus this is a moment when I felt really burdened or tokenized, by others kind of like putting me in that spot?
Yeah, I mean, both can happen at the same time is what I think I was in denial about for a while. So, like, I'll never forget where I was June 2020 and how I was already leading a pretty big team focused on racial justice work. So we were doing the work. So not a surprise, but a surprise that, yes, somebody else gets murdered. But of course, George Floyd, like, it hit very, very differently. And so my natural thought is, I don't want to watch. I can't do this work. What? I need a minute. Let me give my team a minute to take a break, to take the day off. But then the thought right after that is, ooh, but we can't take the day off because our work is to like talk about this story and how horrific it is and get it out there in the right way. And so I've always been grappled with the challenge of the burden of, if not me, then who? Like, if it's not me to see and have some empathy to give my team, people of color, some time off, and I'll just take one for the team. Like, sure, is that fair? But I'd much rather them be okay. I'll figure it out. But then also, on the other hand, the expectation for those that don't look like us, the expectation more implicit is, but girl, we need you to do this work though. We can't do it. So like, thank you for working overtime. So it's always been a juxtaposition for sure. For sure.
And it is overtime. It's like emotional overtime. It's not always like, it's not always
Girl.
the most visible overtime, but like what it takes of you to be feeling the fear, going through the mourning, going through the panic of like, what are we going to do? The hopelessness, but also like writing talking points is a mind fuck. Like
I
I've
mean,
been
but
there.
look, but break it down even further. Writing talking points, pausing to make sure your family is good. You know,
Yeah.
thinking about, oh, could that have been my dad, my brother, my everybody going to sleep like, okay, I think I can not think about it, but no, my sleep is the time that I actually get to think about me. So then how am I sleeping? Because I'm trying to process it for me to show up strong the next day. So yeah, it was left, right, up and down.
And there's such a tie to what you're speaking to, the tie between your mental health and wellness and being in the center of a plight that involves you. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
I remember taking a mental health leave for several weeks toward the and I think like third or fourth quarter 2020 because I had just been in response mode of like, okay, what can we do? What can we offer? Like, what spaces can we create internally? You know, um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think while this, while I'm sure this has been discussed before, I think there's a special significance of experiencing this kind of pressure in the social impact space because you already have so little margin for wellness in a way. You're already being immersed in, and there's a joyful way to look at things. There's a hopeful, optimistic, innovation led way to look at the world. Absolutely. But just if you get down to the facts of it, most of the time you're immersed in what isn't working about our world. You have to be very, in my experience, and my recommendation is you have to be very, very careful with your hygiene because you're not going to go to work and from 9 to 6 set aside the problems of the world and put your head down and do what you need to do. You're going to go to work and from 9 to 6 dive deeper
Yeah,
into the
yeah.
problems, you know? So yeah, I definitely relate. What are your experiences with representation in your work? Because this is one thing that I noticed when I first moved into this sector. I was surprised. It's like you said, a surprise and not a surprise. Like I think some part of me in the back of my mind expected to see more people of color
Mm,
because we know who's always at the bottom of whatever hardship. But also because you do see those statistics like, for example, Black American families being more engaged in charitable giving than other demographics. Like there is more of a practice of living in community through this practice of generosity of time and just like generosity of resources, and so it feels intuitive. I don't like. I think every Black person I know is involved somehow or the other. If it's not their day job, it's like a charity. You know what I mean?
it's in the blood, yes.
Yeah, but then I didn't find, and this might have changed. I entered the space in 2016, and it could have just been the space I was in. I was in consulting, very white collar, very kind of high profile clients. So again, consolidations of power. But I think I was surprised when I felt that othered feeling again, when I
Mm.
felt that lonely feeling, when I felt that only one feeling again. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the gift and the curse, especially with the type of work I do, is more narrative change. So I love that it is heavy, but it's also light too. I get to talk about a lot of the positive of Black culture in a way that is huge and is a win, and it combats a lot of what we see out there that is harmful. So I love being able to bridge the two. But when we talk about representation, I guess I pause because I'm like, well, like, you know, what am I representing? And which hat? Because there's so many hats that I have to wear. Like, am I representing being a woman? Am I representing my race? Hello, you can't deny when you look at me that I am a Black woman, but let's add queer there. Let's add the fact that I am female presenting. And so it's just to try to carry it all is a lot. And I think going back to the June 2020 stuff, what made it like exciting and tough at the same time, it's like, okay, yes, white people. We don't know exactly what we need to do, but come on in. Here's a seat for you. We want you to be at the leadership table. Now tell us what to do. And then you look around and it's like, oh, well, first of all, I'm the only one up in here. And by no means can or should I try to represent an entire, who am I? Race, gender, sexuality. So, but also I'm glad to be at the table. So I got stuff to say, but dang, I'm not trying to say it for everybody. So that constant push and pull, and like when I'm in a space where it's people that look like me, I get to show up and feel a bit freer and happier than I can versus when I'm the only one at the table. I now have to explain to you like basic things that feel tokenizing, that feel burdensome, that feel like, well, I spent 20 minutes having to explain to you why we refer to something as this or why, I don't want to go basic on hair texture and styles, but like some of that would be what we would have to grapple with. So representation is relative, and far too often it ain't enough of us at the table. How about that?
I would agree. So I'm a grounded person. Like, I get the facts. Like, I think even just looking at Black Americans within the people of color, like, I'm staying with race just because that's where I started. but
Yes.
but your point about being like holding multiple identities is so true, and it's been one of the frustrating points of having identity-based conversations in general. But if I look at race alone, like literally what you see when you look around the room, I get that if I'm just looking at the slice of people of color who are Black, that's only like something like 13% of the population. So it does still feel like there's underrepresentation relative to who's involved in the issues and who's involved in the solution building, but I get it. But then there's other moments where even knowing the facts, it doesn't make it less lonely. Like, I think I shared with you earlier this year, I held a lunch and it was intentionally designed to be an intimate lunch. So we were going for like 20 or fewer people. I was co-hosting with somebody, 4 people working in social impact. And so my portion of the list involved a number of invitations to Black folks, people of color, and purely through happenstance, everyone who was supposed to come had some sort of life thing. 2 people got sick. They were like at conferences, whatever, got sick. 1 person had a family emergency. 1 person, something with the school and the kid, so just like life happening. But it was enough to wipe out the racial diversity of the entire room. So then once again, it was just me. Was it a beautiful event? Did I appreciate everyone there? Of course. But it's the moments where like I'm not expecting that that's going to matter to me, that it matters, and it distracts me. It distracts me.
But it always matters. Yeah. Yeah. And that example speaks to like far too often what happens, like with all of us, when you are of color, just the amount of weight, the tougher it is to show up, to get to the thing, because we usually are at the bottom. And I know, girl, I know you asking me questions, but I'm just curious what you thought about the term BIPOC. Is that a term that resonated with you, that you were proud to see enter the space?
So for me, I appreciated the solidarity it connoted, the container. I just have I have trouble in general with all of the language, because it's, like you're already always being flattened. There aren't a lot of space when it's life and death. Nobody, like, for me, my experience, I think, is distinct from a lot of Black Americans that come from American Black families.
Absolutely.
But in a life or death moment, you're not going to be like, well, actually, I'd like to talk about, like, it's just like, get a grip and like, don't center yourself. And by the way, they don't care. They think you all look, even the people who aren't Black, they think are Black because you have some melanin and you're in the line of fire. So it's like, you're already kind of like deprioritizing nuance. So then, and labels inherently deprioritize nuance. So there is a frustration there. But at the same point, we have to talk to each other. we need ways to kind of like DEI, BIPOC, and maybe I can't be clear-headed because this is the language of my business. So I'm familiarized to it. It's not really like tripping me. fill in the blanks of the connotations of what people are trying to say. But I guess what I'm saying is like, it's not that like I love it and I was so excited and I was like, this is a revolution, but I didn't hate it. It didn't bother me enough for me to feel like, I would never say that. Although tellingly, I don't really say it now. Like, so I guess that answers itself. But I also, it's more about like, I understand the intent of like, how do we talk about people who are having not parallel experiences, because that's never going to be even individual, but having a lot of the same systemic barriers. And, and that part is, if it's an opportunity for solidarity, I think it's worth exploring. Like, I remember I was hosting these workshops in summer of 2020 for just advocates on how to sort of build shared narrative priorities in the wake of George Floyd, and how all of the messaging was going to have to change, and all of the campaigns were pointing at things like defund the police. And so one of those, how you do a workshop, it's kind of like you're trying to get to clarity. So you're kind of oversimplifying. So I'm like, what are three things, three messaging priorities we have for this moment? And I thought each one was going to be like a hardcore policy ask, because that's how the air felt. That's in that moment, it felt like, we're not fucking around. Like, people are saying defund the police left, right, and center, So I thought it was all going to be stuff in that tone. And they did, the advocates who all came from different organizations, different issue focuses, but wanted in some way to be a part of racial justice advocacy work. They did select defund the police as a messaging priority, but the other two were actually messages about the movement. So the next most popular message was about solidarity and the need for solidarity. And the third most popular was about longevity, which they connected to solidarity by saying, but it's it's the adage of like, you go farther together. And so like, that has stayed with me. The fact that even the most staunch kind of like, I'm here to talk about the Black experience, are craving solidarity for sustainability. And so when I see acronyms like that, like a BIPOC, the part of it that makes me feel like, okay, that could be useful to the work is that element, that it could draw more people in. Why? Are you like an anti that phrase person?
Yeah, I am now. I am, because BIPOC and DEI, I think both terms, you should fact check me, were created by folks that don't identify with those communities. So, so for me, like, that's the challenge. Like, Black, period. That's how I identify. That's how I strongly feel Black people, Black Americans have been treated the worst in America, arguably Native Americans, of course, because of history and how, America was created. But, if we start with Black and slavery, and we still have a form of slavery with the criminal justice system, I'm a big fan of, if we focus on Black, we get everybody in between, period. So for me to have to feel like I had to connect with other of color communities, like, sure, fine, but I always have to belittle myself or erase a bit of me to allow for others, when, like, I just want to be Black, and Black is enough. So come on.
Black is enough.
It's more than enough.
What's your experience been with finding, like, kind of in the solidarity vein, like finding champions, finding people in the work, in your workplaces, like finding people who were willing to go there with you or not, or finding people like being met with resistance. So I'm super curious, like, just what have your collaborative experiences been like on this basis,
Yeah. They've been mostly positive. I'm very fortunate to say that folks that identify that are of color and not of color, I've had some excellent champions, which I'm grateful for. And I do think, I don't know that it's rare, but I think like the ability, especially for white hetero males, to see and acknowledge their privilege and what they don't know and get out of the way. And so that has been helpful for me for sure. I also have seen, I've just had a lot of great champions. Oh, let me get out of the way. Let me help you until, until you are almost on the same level as them, and then it becomes a threat. And so that, I would say, has been my bigger challenge in a bit of a naive way, Kat, where, people will champion and help you, whatever you need, let me do it, let me get out of the way, until it's like, oh yeah, no, I got this. And in fact, it's not that I don't think I need you anymore, but because I am doing just fine, you are the one that's feeling threatened. And so, what does
Mm,
that mean, and how does that relationship shift or change in a way where everybody can win? And I do think, from my experience, unfortunately, there are too many people at the top who do not believe that everybody can win. And that is fundamentally where I differ from those experiences.
it's like a different version of the glass ceiling, a black ceiling, if you will.
Yes, there we go. There we go. Girl, it is enough space for everybody to win. It really is.
I know what you mean. I don't understand. You're making me think of another guest who was recently on the podcast, Dr. Jocelyn Logan Friend, and she primarily works in disability education, but also consults about
Beautiful.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she was talking about how growing up in, I think it's Texas, somewhere in the South, in a large family, she learned the lesson that there's always enough. Like she had all these sisters and things like that, but there was always enough, and she feels like living that kind of informs her beliefs and her approach in social impact. Which
Absolutely.
I see what you're saying. Like I think for me, I've been similarly very lucky to have people around me who were willing to create platforms or seed platforms or just be supportive, help spread the word, help amplify. And that's been multiracial, multigender, multi-sexual identity, um, in
Love that.
some cases, multi-geography. And so that gives me hope. And I feel like it's a microcosm of what we're going for.
Totally.
I do feel like sometimes I'm the one who's conflicted, like we were talking about earlier, where I'm like, I don't believe in doing social impact work that promotes one set of values when we're not trying. It's not going to be perfect, but we are not trying to replicate those values behind the scenes. I don't believe in that. So there is a part, once you kind of put your hand up and you're like, I care about this thing, you of course do get pulled to the internal. But there are times that I felt, and it might be because in my identity, it is gendered and it is racialized. There have been times when I felt like I want to focus on the external right now. Like I have things to offer partners, the cultural conversation, things at scale, things that are less from a caretaking place and a safe space creating place. She says creating a safe space. And more like what I do, like, like this strategy work. And so I feel like because I'm sometimes conflicted in that, I can feel that there's confusion sometimes with my
Yep.
collaborators of like, well, I thought you wanted to do this. And like, now you're mad that I'm asking you to do this. And it's like this sensitive dance of like, but it's empowering when I want to do it. Like, and that's the part that's hard to make into a job, because a job is about, here's the job description. These are the bullets. You do the same thing every time until we change the bullets together. And with lived experience coming into that, it has to feel good, or it really quickly, I think more quickly than people realize, feels degrading or seeds
Transactional. Yep.
resentment of like, yo, like, why am I taking care of you? You are not taking care of me. We can do a transaction if it's a reciprocal transaction.
All right.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
transactions exist. That is what makes the world go round. So whatever, but it can't be a one-sided transaction where I am continually pouring into you to the point where I'm putting my own professional goals for in the social impact space to the background, but then it's not how am I being poured into? I think that's like where it comes to me more than like there was like a anti-champion, like trying to sabotage my thing that maybe other people have experienced.
The more diverse the top is, the more inclusive, the better informed any and all decisions will be. But it starts at the top. So if everybody looks a certain way, gender or not, then that's a problem, period. Anything that stems from that will be transactional, will be like lesser than, because at the top, you lack what needs to happen.
But don't you think I'm literally asking, do you think I was going to ask, like, don't you think everyone's a bit transactional? But then I'm kind of thinking about it and I'm like, well, there is a lot of caretaking in the work. There is a lot of doing it because like it feels like this is what you should be doing. And like this is how you care for each other. I honestly think that that is part of what's tricky about social impact in general. And it's one of those things where sometimes if I think about it too much, I'm like my head's gonna explode. Like it already is kind of hard to conceive of making positive change transactional, which we do by virtue of having jobs related to it. And it's like I feel multiple ways about it because on the one hand, value is real, adding value is real and deserves to be compensated. I'm a huge like whatever, yes, absolutely all the things about capitalism, but this is where we are. And also remember that my background, I'm coming from the arts, I'm coming from media, it's intellectual property. Like the intangible, the idea has inherent value and should be connected to the person who offered the idea. Then that is a creation of generational wealth and all of those things. Like I have had clients in the music industry who were in their like 80s still living off of songs that they wrote in the 1960s. You know what I mean? Like this is
Beautiful.
a real thing. So I'm not like saying that like this shouldn't be a sector and no one should get paid to do positive change and you should just do it from your heart and stuff. But it is hard. You're like comparing apples to like oranges a little bit, you know?
Yeah, you are. You are. And I mean, I'm glad you opened that door because I would say, sure, the output is transactional. But for me, it's more of before we even get to the output, how are we defining? And a phrase I love to use with my team and clients is who wins from this? So it could be one thing somebody could have an idea and it may make sense on paper. But when we really think about what communities are winning, I think that's for me where I determine, is it transactional and how transactional is it? Like, sure, I should be getting paid for my work and my inputs. Absolutely. But because I am approaching everything with making sure my communities win from it, it is extremely different than somebody coming in to tell me what should be done for my communities.
I see. That's very fair. Yeah, that's super fair. And I also think, I mean, I'll speak for myself. Like, I don't think it's zero sum. Like, I don't think it's like in a literal game where either you win or I win. I think it's everybody winning and leaving each other alone.
That's the thing. It's enough space for everybody to win. You just have to like believe that and move with that in mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
I completely understand. So is your work is very, very culture forward. Mm-hmm. It's like events, it's stories in the media, it's bringing people together. How is your work impacted as these kind of like what, you know, mostly conservative media, I think, would call like culture wars? So I told a story recently about working with a client where I had to check, because of the state they were based in, I had to check if I was like still legally allowed to say like equity, or if it had been so vilified that it was now criminalized, and like, and I would be like putting my client in harm's way. But like, I'm just curious, how does the changing conversation around what is fair and what is ethical and what is right and what is legal around diversity, equity, inclusion impact the work that you do? Do you have to think differently? Do you have to move differently? Do you have to speak or write or frame things differently? How does it come down to it?
Okay. So I would answer it, since you in your intro said I just hit a year P Nation, which I'm very excited about. I think what I have learned in a year is that the less transactional my work is, the more I am allowed. So like less press, we are hiring you to get a bunch of stories on an event. We want you to showcase that we have hit our mark on blah, 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 blah. It's less of that work, and it truly is more of that narrative change work. And so a lot of the clients that I have the privilege of working with, the work is like, okay, when we think of gender equality, we don't really like how, we're only talking about men and women right now. In 3 years, we would love a scenario where we are including other identities. How can we get towards that? When we look at the criminal justice reform system, there are terms that we hate and despise. What events, what sort of actions, what sort of framing needs to happen so that we can create space for folks that have been impacted by the system to feel like human first, second, and third. So a lot of it is strategizing and trying and testing different things. And so I say that because it means that the type of clients I get to partner with at the onset, they get it. They don't need to be convinced. They don't need me to come in and convince them that this team can come in and make you more diverse. Like, no, boo. The team is already diverse. They know what they need to do. They're looking for a partner that can mirror and amplify who they already are. So that is very, very different than the type of work I was doing before P Nation.
So everybody already has a stance on it, which is we're doing it anyway. We're not going to stop
Period.
talking.
Before DEI, after DEI, whatever.
Right.
It is in our DNA, so let's go.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. And I always, I mean, that's when the best work happens, when it's like two like minds coming together, and you don't waste any of that time trying to like argue with each other. And you could just get to being creative, putting stuff out in the world like
it's
that.
It's a beautiful place.
That is a beautiful place. Could you, because you just reminded me talking about P Nation again, can you share the metaphor that you share about P Nation?
Oh, girl, this is one of my favorite stories to tell. Because I always get, oh, that's such a cute name. Oh, I love the name. And like, duh, my last name is P. We know what a nation is. But for me, it is very personal. People that look and identify like me, unfortunately, we have been treated or trained to think that we are as small as a pea. And we're not. We are as big as a nation. So every piece of work that we touch is rooted in flipping that narrative. Like, we ain't as small as a pea, girl. Nation, let's go.
I love it. I love a metaphor, as we all know.
Yeah.
What are some of your hopes and expectations? Because we started off with me babbling about expectations around DEI from all sides of the table. What are some of your hopes and expectations now that, you've been doing work with this lens throughout your career? I feel like I was doing work with this lens throughout my social impact portion of my career, but there is this sense of you work and maybe you don't wait, but for some of us, there's a sense of like you work and then there's like something happens and there's a catch up to where you are. And then you like work and then, there's like this cadence of waiting for space to be created or not. Some people would say I'm not waiting. I'm just like I'm smashing through, creating space, But what are your hopes and expectations beyond what you are able to lead with P Nation and with your clients that is all within your control and within your vision. But when you think about where you plug into a bigger, just huge network of people working in social change, people getting up every day, they're going to work, they're making decisions from the most internal about like, who do we hire or who do we put in this role, all the way to how a campaign is framed, or whose voice we're amplifying within a coalition. What are your hopes and expectations for how the social impact sector engages with, quote, DEI, with diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, affinity, identity from this point forward?
Great question. Simply put, my hope and expectation would be that we get rid of acronyms. I hope that we live in a world, maybe we'll get to see it, where we are not trained to chase acronyms and moments versus just being and existing. I would love to see, and a lot of the work I do is, yes, your table is great, but we are creating our own table. And there are enough tables and enough rooms and enough buildings for everybody to win. So simply put, just connecting with people and creating space to see and value people for who they are and where they come from is the name of the game.
Completely. I feel that. I feel like paradoxically, the clearer I've gotten in some of this thinking, the less I like leading with the jargon.
Yeah, I agree.
That was
Yeah,
helpful when we
yeah.
didn't have shared language and we didn't understand like what we were talking about. But now it often feels less helpful. Yeah.
It's too much. Yeah, yeah. And just a quick story, a friend of mine did a TED talk basically on DEI, but she did not use DEI at all throughout the entire 12, 13-minute talk. And it was amazing to see how much more effective she was, how many people were able to connect even more because she simplified it. We are human first, kind, let's lead with kindness, and let's make space for all people to feel seen. It really should be that simple.
100%. And this is my theory with CRT as well, with critical race theory. I think if you had close to the same curriculum, but not branded it critical race theory outside of where you knew that would be well received, like a
Mm-hmm.
higher ed program, that's like related to ethnic studies, I think you might have been able to just advance some of the thinking about accurate history and systems without the distracting noise. And
Yeah.
this is where I feel like as strategists, we could be
Yep.
better.
Yep.
I'm saying we in the broadest sense, because it's like you kind of are contradicting yourself. How are you on the one hand saying we need something called critical race theory because people are so racist, but then thinking that those same people would want to engage with something called critical race theory? You just told me
Oh
they don't
man.
want to. So like, why are you putting that on the package? And then let's all be shocked that
Yeah.
it's not well received, like that this is why the language part matters, because something like that creates a years long distraction and like legal and political and cultural battle. That is not the point. My
Yeah. And
understanding of
sets
the
us
point,
back.
yes, my understanding of the point is just to talk about how we got to where we are today with the experiences of different groups, how they're able to engage in politics and the economy, and so we can spark ideas for how we might make things better for
Yeah.
everyone, but it's just the way media works today, especially, you say the wrong thing and people will latch onto it and run with it forevermore. And then they're in control of your talking
We're
points.
seeing it
And
happen. Yeah. Yeah.
we're living it. Like, so I do think that more care could be taken. Maybe that's my hope and
Yeah.
expectation, that that we learn a bit about the sensitivity. It really, really matters how you frame what you're saying. And the more you can stick to just the simple truth of it, just as you were saying with your friend who gave the TED talk, the more likely you are to engage people on a human level, or even just a logical level of like, I want people in my country to win so my country can win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And that's what I love about America is that a lot of times I do think like the simpler, the better for many Americans, just the easier it is for me to comprehend and take it in, the more likely I will like it. But then you have maybe the elite coast or, communities. We live in a bubble here in New York where we constantly want to be pushed and challenged and we can handle it and we don't mind it. So there's a spectrum. There's always a spectrum. Even like Black Lives Matter, Kat, that's simple. It's very simple. It's very clear. But to see how folks turn that into like silly foolishness. So sometimes you just cannot win, which is unfortunate.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, there will be weaponization no matter what you do. But I think there's lessons to be learned. Um, well, this has been amazing.
This is good.
I would like to ask you some outro questions. I have 3 questions, and you can answer all of them, or some of them, or one of them, or whatever you want to do. Okay, so the first question, I would love if you would share with the issue space community how you take care of yourself in this work. What keeps you motivated? What keeps you feeling connected to yourself and to what you're working on? The second question is, if people could take away just one thing from our chat, what would you want it to be? And then the third is, if there's anything you're working on that you would like us to know about that we can follow and amplify.
One takeaway from the conversation would be when space is created for everybody to show up their authentic self, um, everybody wins. Okay, so what keeps me motivated? I'll try not to go super deep, but what motivates me is like the future, young folks for sure. But then certainly when I think about like baby Jana, and how, baby Jana, there were so many things that I had to navigate that I just had to see and I didn't understand, which led me to my work to challenge and question and push. And so being able to have answers for baby Jana is definitely what keeps me motivated. And like selfishly taking time for me. So much of this work is about pouring into everybody else. So when I am able to pour into me, whether it's meditation, whether it's, again, baby Jana, or just numbing myself and watching some TV, the world is a better place.
And we need to rebrand. Like, what's a non-judgmental version of selfish?
Oh, yeah,
You know?
I've talked about this with, yeah, I've tried to rebrand selfish actually with my team, and it's kind of working and not really. Maybe self-care is more of a,
Yeah, it's like self-caring.
yeah, or unapologetically me. I mean, there's a few different terms. Yeah.
Something. But yeah, it can't be to the point where we're like tiptoeing around the fact that we're human and sometimes need to take a mental break. Like, that's just real. Is there anything that you are working on that you want to share with the issue space community that we could follow along?
I mean, lots of cool projects. I think it may be over by the time this comes out, so I'll just phrase it. Very excited about this film festival. First ever film festival that will be taking place inside of a prison facility in San Quentin. There's an amazing crew, led by Rasan Thomas, who spent quite a bit of time up in San Quentin, and he's putting together, along with others, a beautiful, beautiful festival. You have every single film directed or starred by somebody who's been impacted by the system. You have a lot of mainstream films that are talking about tackling CJ reform. And so you'll have the cast there, some heavy hitters from the entertainment world just coming to this facility. Oh, the fun part about this, now I'm getting long-winded, is that you get to judge the films. And so they have a set of celebs that are judging the films. And then inside the system, girl, you have people that will be watching it and judging it from their cell to come together and uplift this community. And the name of the game there is that everybody, you are better than your worst mistake. We all are human at the end of the day. So let's normalize these stories. And the only way you can uplift criminal justice reform, especially through TV and film, is to have the folks that have been impacted do the work. Period. So that's the one for sure. That's the most exciting.
Oh, that just gives me chills. Well, definitely, regardless of the timing, we could find it and share it with people because it sounds amazing. Did you see the documentary? I hope I'm getting it right. 26 and a half to life.
Oh, hello. Rasan Thomas is in there, girl.
Okay.
Yes,
Maybe
yes,
that's
yes.
right. When you
It's
said the
at
name,
San
I was
Quentin.
like, yes,
Yes.
incredible. Incredible.
So yes, it will be an extension to a degree of a film like that. Incredible.
I mean, just so humbling and just like, oh, just makes you feel like
We need more stories like that. We got to normalize it.
we need more story. Well, we both do and we don't. We need not to have a reason to make that
Well,
story.
we need to see more stories like that so we can stop having the stories. Yes, yes.
Oh, Jana, I'm so appreciative that you came through the space.
Oh, what's the outro music?
Oh, it'll be playing. I don't have it now, but it's like it's this. It's like. It's like, it's like this little magical chime. But oh my God, it's such a good conversation. Thank you for being real, honest, unapologetic, giving us a lot to think about, a lot of challenges. Issue Space community, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you can find us at issuespacemedia.com and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.